Okay, welcome back to chapter five. In this chapter, we're going to be sorting through Adlerian therapy. Um, Alfred Adler, like Freud, like Carl Jung, was one of the original co-founders of psychotherapy, developing theories, developing the practice, working with people, trying to understand people. And so while Alfred Adler originally started working with Freud after Freud wrote Interpretation of Dreams, he broke apart from Freud and developed some of his own theories, but we're still in that realm of therapy, psychoanalysis as well. So when we look at the three people that we've discussed so far, we have Sigmund Freud. He created psychoanalysis, and the question that he was trying to answer are what are the hidden forces? So with the unconscious, what are the hidden forces that are conflicted inside of you, and how are those forces causing problems in your life, and how can we bring those to the surface and help you resolve them? Carl Jung who created analytical psychology. He was looking at the parts of the self that you have not integrated yet. And then Alfred Adler, who created individual psychology, he was interested in how are you trying to matter in this world. And is it helping you belong? So you see with Adler, this emphasis on society, being a productive member of society, being the importance of connection with family, with friends, with neighbors. So there's a real emphasis on that. And Alfred Adler also was interested in working with children and families, and some of his theories were used by family systems therapists when they were trying to develop family therapy as well. So he was also born in Austria. He was a medical doctor, a psychotherapist, and founder of individual psychology. So born in Austria, graduated medical school, originally being an optometrist at age 25. In 1897, he married his wife, Rasa Epstein, who was a social justice activist. So that also kind of influences him and shapes some of his ideas. In 1902, that's when he joins Freud. Actually invited him to join the Wednesday Psychological Society after Adler defended his interpretation of dreams. He parted ways with Freud in 1911. And then in 1912, he founded his Society for Individual Psychology. So at this point, he's 42 years old. In 1914, World War I broke out, and he served as a medical director in the military. In 1919, when the war ended, he established 32 child guidance clinics in schools to help children that were struggling in the schools with their behaviors. In 1927, he published Understanding Human Nature. He ended up having to leave Austria because of the rise in Nazism and anti-Semitism during World War II. And so he immigrated to the US in 1934. And he died at 67 from a heart attack during a lecture tour in Scotland. And similar to Freud, he was very prolific. He published approximately 300 books and articles together. And so Alfred Adler, for a little while, was forgotten. He had prominence, and then people weren't necessarily talking about him. But when we go over some of his theories, you're going to see how it influenced a lot of different branches of psychology. Some of his ideas influenced them. So there's been sort of a resurgence and interest in Adler, going back to the roots with this. So Adler had some differences with Freud. So Adler didn't believe that the past determined the future. He also felt like setting goals could influence the future in a positive way. So he introduced this idea of setting goals, which you'll see picked up by behaviorists as well as in cognitive behavioral. It's hard to imagine working this field without having treatment plans and goals, but there was a time where that was not, people were not setting goals as part of counseling and treatment. Um, Adler was, while he didn't reject the unconscious, wanted to focus more on conscious factors than unconscious. He felt that that was more productive, and trying to dig around in the unconscious was um, not always the most useful. So he was trying to develop his therapy. Freud was taking care of that, dealing with the unconscious, and a lot of his followers were, and Adler was more interested in like how can we deal with the conscious factors. Um, he was also interested in person's strengths and resources rather than their problems and weaknesses. So Freud was more interested in problems and weaknesses, and Adler was interested in how a person could use their strengths to overcome some of the problems that they were struggling with. Adler also emphasized the importance of the environment and contributing to society. Um, and so that's a social workers tend to like anything that has to do with how the environment plays as a factor in personality development or how it impacts people. So he was an early proponent of recognizing that how the environment can impact people, but he was also very interested in how people can contribute to society. He also, instead of with psychoanalysis or Freudian psychoanalysis, the interpretation lied with the therapist, and he was actually more interested. He turned this on its head and was just like, I wonder if I can get the client to interpret their own experiences. I can help guide them, but that was more of an empowering technique in terms of that, because often what could happen with psychoanalysis is the therapist would make interpretations, and the patient might have been like, I don't know, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, and could be befuddled. Whereas Adler was just like, well, why don't we have the client interpret their own experiences in terms of what the meaning is for them. So that was more of an empowering way. And then he theorized that rather than driven by the id's desire for pleasure, he believed that people are driven by a need to overcome their sense of inferiority. So that was also a definite break from Freud, who was felt that people were driven by the desire for pleasure. His one of the criticisms of Adler versus Freud is that Freud had a very developed sense of psychoanalysis. It was very developed. There was clear theory, there were clear techniques, and Adler, even though he was prolific and he wrote a lot of books, it wasn't always clear. He actually said that he preferred to be in treatment or preferred to be talking with others rather than locked away writing, doing the writing, even though he did write plenty. So some of his theories are not the most well developed, and there's not as many techniques as well. But some of the core theories, how people develop a sense of worth and how they belong. And so there's a theme of inferiority. So if you've ever heard inferiority complex, a superiority complex, that comes from Adler's. He was, as a young boy, he was the second, I believe, of son in his family. He also had a sickness when he was young as well, and he found himself always trying to catch up with his brother. His brother seemed to be better at many things, and it always made him feel bad. And so this idea that stuck with him from childhood, it was the kernel, the seed that helped him sort of develop his own ideas. And he felt that a lot of people had this from their childhood, that where there was ways where we felt inferior, whether it was to our siblings, whether it was because we couldn't please our parents, whether it was because we didn't fit in school, academically or socially. So he felt that that was something that was always with every person, and it was something that he explored with people. He also had a style of living. So instead of calling it personality, he said that people had patterns or beliefs or behaviors um, that we did in order to gain worth with others, and that was called our lifestyle. So, Carl Jung was more interested in developing exploring personality, and Adler wasn't. He was more interested in this style of living, how patterns, beliefs, or behaviors could contribute to who we were, our development as a person. He also had social interest. That was it, and he believed that our mental health had to do with how well we connected or contributed to our community or with others, and that if we had broken relationships or didn't feel like society accepted us or we weren't contributing in some sort of way, that was going to deeply impact our mental health. And he also, as part of his assessment process, he also took in birth order, and he found that family position often influences early stages of belonging, could also influence where we may have felt inferior in our lives as well. In terms of understanding the concepts of inferiority, striving, and compensation, he says that inferiority is real or perceived. So it could be real that we're not gifted academically or, sports or socially, or it could just be perceived. So it doesn't necessarily have to be based in reality, but it doesn't matter whether it's actual fact or just our own beliefs. It does impact us. So this inferiority, he says, starts in early childhood. He says the sources could be unmet needs or comparison to siblings, peers, or societal standards. And then for most of our lives, we are striving for superiority. And so what he means by this is really more close to like the humanistic psychology. So if you think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs with the self-actualization, he's meaning striving for superiority in that way, like that we are becoming self-actualized and the best version of ourselves, not necessarily like lording it over someone else. That's for the complexes. But striving for superiority, he doesn't view as a bad thing. He views it as us trying to better ourselves and self-growth. Self-growth. And then compensation is the way that we overcome or we try to mask our feelings of inferiority. And he recognizes that there's healthy compensation and unhealthy compensation. So imagine this, a student who struggles with math. If healthy compensation, if you struggle with math, is that you would seek a tutor or join a study group. So you recognize a weakness, and so your growth mindset is to like, oh, I'll get a tutor, or I'll join a study group, or I'll go talk to the teacher after cl the class to help me understand this type of thing. Unhealthy compensation would be a student who struggles with math. So I'm not good at math, so I'll find a way to cheat on the test, or I'll avoid it. So I'll drop the math class, or I'll just brag or exaggerate about grades, about their grades. They didn't do as bad at on the test, or whatever it might be. So those are the excuse me. Those are the ways, the inferiority. We strive to not be inferior, and we do that through compensation, and hopefully we are doing it in a healthy way. But then there are the complexes, and so this is when we can have an inferiority complex and we can have a superiority complex. And so this is when we've engaged in some unhealthy ways of trying to compensate. So the inferiority complex is a pervasive sense of inadequacy and inferiority, and it can lead a person to avoid or disconnect socially. So someone who has an inferiority complex might just not want to socialize with others, may become super focused on being perfect and perfectionism, might be overly critical of themselves, might seek seek constant validation, or may compare themselves to others in a way that makes them feel bad. So those are the ways that an inferiority complex can hurt somebody. It's usually disconnection. All of these things usually lead to disconnection or avoidance. If we're dealing with superiority complex, though, this is he describes it as attitudes and fantasies of how great they are, huge egos, and they do this to defend against feelings of inferiority, and these behaviors often push other people away. So examples of superiority complexes are people who are self-important, bragging, or narcissistic. They may put other people down to make themselves feel better or look better. They could have excessive competitiveness. They may try to control other people, or they could just ignore input from others. And often, if you behave in those types of ways, that's going to create some type of distance in your life, and wreak some havoc on relationships as well. So those are the complexes that he saw. Um, uh, when we talk about our inferiority, so the assumption in his theory is that we all have it in some way um, where we wished we were better, or had more skills or things like that. So developing healthy ways of coping with inferiority. So if you find yourself comparing to others, he would recommend the strategy of comparing yourself to your ideal self, not others. So I know oftentimes, like in sports, like if you're on the swim team, you're trying to beat your time, not anybody else's time, but can you beat your time in terms of how fast you can swim laps? So comparing yourself to your ideal self, not others. He also would encourage people to focus more on getting involved and contributing to society. So whether that's volunteering or engaging in random acts of kindness towards others. I know the big one for random acts of kindness in Rhode Island is the pay it forward at the Dunkin' Donuts. And every time I'm in class, we talk about that. This is usually the one that people volunteer that's happened. Oh yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've gone through Dunkin' Donuts and someone's paid for my coffee for me, so I pay for the next person's coffee. And I think one day it was like on the news that like it was like 27 or 30 people had like paid it forward in a row or something like that. So those are all things that make you feel like the world's not so awful and you can contribute to others and society. And if you think about even the times in your life where you've volunteered, even if it's only been a couple of times, hopefully they've been positive experiences, as well, where you can kind of feel that connection and feel like you've done good. Another way of coping is to develop skills. So, taking a class in something that interests you, setting realistic goals, connecting with others, reflecting on your strengths rather than your weaknesses, and seeing if you can use your strengths to help you navigate challenges that happen. That's a big one that you'll see if you read any of the positive psychology literature. Um, and then even gratitude or self-compassion practices as well. Those are all ways to help with coping with inferiority. Going back into his theory on social interest, he says this is the opposite of being self-centered. And he defines it as our ability to empathize, care for, and cooperate with others. He says that it's our social interest is developed in childhood. It's shaped by early experiences, and the individual sense of belonging. So, if you think back to your childhood, uh, how did you, what was your ability as a child to cooperate, empathize, or care for others? What were your experiences like when you first went to school? All of those things where, were you accepted? Was it harder for you to fit in? Was it overwhelming for you? So our social interest gets developed in childhood. Um, it's central to our mental health. Again, he believed that the stronger our social ties to others, and the healthier our relationships are, that our overall psychological well-being is impacted. And it promotes community and cooperation, encourages feelings of connection and sense of responsibility towards others. And then Adler's view on health and success. People with high social interest contribute positively to society and cope effectively with challenges. And when he calls it the opposite of self-centeredness, he says it's a lack of social interest can lead to isolation and difficulty in relationships. In terms of style of living, or sometimes referred to as lifestyle, it refers to how a person thinks, acts, and deals with challenges. This also is shaped in early childhood. Um, the early childhood experiences affects how a person approaches or avoids problems in their lives. It's influenced by family dynamics and child's unique perception of the world. He says this is developed before the age of 6 and can unify the personality. He said if you grow up in a healthy environment, you have a functional style of living, and if you grow up in an unhealthy environment, which he called pampered or neglected, then you can have a dysfunctional style of living or dysfunctional style of relating to others. He also observed that there are 4 styles of living. There's the ruling type, which are usually the bullying or dominating types. There's the getting type, where they're selfish and they take more than they give to others. There's the avoiding type where they escape life and avoid socially constructed activities. And then there is the socially useful type, which has a great deal of social interest and activity. He also observed with birth order, noticing how a person's role in the family can influence personality or their worldview. So he says, in the chapter in the book, it goes into more detail, and if you Google birth order, you can find other descriptions of birth order and what it might mean for your personality. Is this, can this be validated by science or research? Not necessarily, but it's still a concept that is out there and can be interesting. Oldest child, he noticed that in families, the oldest child tends to be a high achiever. They tend to be dependable and hardworking. The second child, often is usually the opposite of the oldest child. So whatever the oldest child succeeds at, the second child will do something in the opposite direction. So if the oldest child's good at sports, the second child might be good at like art or might be good academically, or usually in a different way than the oldest child is. So the second child usually is has a competitive struggle with the firstborn, achieves successes in areas that the older sibling doesn't. The middle child may think that life is unfair, feel invisible, assumes a poor me attitude, could become, but also could become the peacemaker in a high conflict household. The youngest child can be prone to developing helplessness, and the only child has some things in common with the oldest child, where they can be achievement oriented. But the oldest child can also be more attuned to the adult world, take longer to figure out social skills with other kids because they have less opportunities to play with other children. And they might just be used to being the center stage in their parents' lives, so it might be hard for them to share attention with other people. So those are the things that he noticed. In class, we will usually have a discussion about, do you agree or disagree with this theory? And one of the things that we talk about, there's usually some people who agree that can say, "Oh yeah, I see that. I'm the youngest child, and I can see how I was like babied or pampered, or I'm the oldest child, and I'm in charge of stuff, or I'm the middle child, and I'm the peacemaker." So some people can resonate with it, and other people, uh, because their families do not look like this, because maybe they're from a blended family where parents had children, both their parents had children somewhere else and then they came together at a later age, that changes the dynamics, or maybe they came from a single family household and that can change dynamics. So some of these theories can represent a moment in time when he was developing them in the 1930s and may not reflect the modern family as much. So moving into Adlerian techniques, so we'll talk about a couple of techniques here. So if you recall, with the therapeutic alliance with Freud, he talked about the blank screen approach, having the client lie down, having the therapist be out of view. And here, Adler's like, there's no couches, there's chairs. And I want to be more collaborative, and I want to be more and I want to use goals. So collaborative and oh, why are you coming to treatment? What goals can we set? And so it's a very different approach than say a Freudian approach where it's more about their interpretation of what's wrong with you. So his was more of an empowering, building rapport, getting to know clients. Um, um, he focuses on the person rather than the problem that they sought treatment for, and the therapist works to understand the client, how they experience the world, and tries to understand what not only what is the maladaptive patterns that they have in their life, but what are their strengths, what are their adaptive patterns in terms of how they navigate the world. So it's looking at both, not just one. Whereas psychoanalysis is more about the maladaptive patterns. The Adler wanted to recognize his client's strengths as well. One of the main techniques that he used was encouragement, and in the middle of encouragement is the word courage. He saw that a lot of the client's psychological problems stemmed from a lack of courage to face the three basic life tasks. So whether that's, work, whether that's social belonging, and whether that's love. So he wanted to develop a technique where the clients that he worked with could feel encouraged or could develop courage to take on some of these tasks. Um, it's the most distinctive technique and essential to all phases of the counseling relationship of trying to build a client's courage. So, what could this look like? So, imagine you're working with a young adult client who's struggling with social anxiety. And because of the social anxiety, feels anxious about applying for jobs, fearing rejection, and not feeling good enough. So if you were using the encouragement technique, if the first thing you would do is normalize the client's fears. Like that's reasonable to fear rejection, to not feel good enough. There's always a risk when you apply for a job, especially if you don't get it. So first thing would just be to normalize it. So, and say something like it makes sense that you feel nervous. Most people feel unsure when they put themselves out there. Bam. Just normalizing the anxiety rather than trying to wrestle with it or analyze it. Just being like, yeah, that makes sense. I can understand that. That's when people put themselves out there, that's a risk. Then he would look to identify the client's private logic, which is the mistaken beliefs behind the fear. And so private logic is something that happens in childhood, when we're young, usually before the age of 5, when we're trying to understand the world and we have a mistaken belief. So the private logic. So by doing this, you would ask a question. So when you imagine applying for a job and not getting it, what do you believe that would say about you? And so if we ask this question to different people, like they would have different answers, and that answer could hold the key in terms of how they see the world. Um, Another step would be encourage social interest and contribution. You've told me you care about helping others. How might working allow you to contribute to something bigger than just proving your own worth? So appealing to that social connection, and then use encouragement to affirm capability. You've already taken a big risk by starting therapy. So just even acknowledging how vulnerable a person is, just acknowledging coming to therapy, what a risk that is. So you've already taken a big risk by starting therapy and showing up. That shows you have more courage than you think. And what if we treat the job search as practice and not perfection? So helping the person to think about it differently, not especially if you notice that that person struggles with being with perfectionism. So this is just practice, not perfect. Um, and then assign a task to affirm capability. So saying something like, would you be willing to apply to one job a week? Not to get it, but to prove that you can act despite fear. So also reframing it. This isn't just about you getting the job. I just, well, that you, even though you're nervous, that you have fear, you can still act in spite of fear, right? That's what courage is. Like courage is when you have fear, still acting. And so those are some of the techniques in terms of encouraging people. Early recollections as a technique. So early recollections are the earliest memories, and when you watch the video quiz with Stan and Corey, you're going to see that this is one of the techniques that are used in the video. So earliest memories, on average, for people start around age 5. Some people like remember can have memories a little bit earlier than that, but on average, that's usually around this age is where most people's memory starts. Some people's memories start a little bit later, but on average, it starts around 5 or 6. Um, it's also important when you're doing early recollections to know that they're perceptions, they're not always historical facts. But that's okay because perception is going to help identify some of the mistaken beliefs that the client may have about the world. So Adler explored early memories to assess beliefs that may still be influencing the person in the present moment. He says that the first memories will show an individual's fundamental view of life, especially if you get a cluster of them. So, some guided questions if you're trying to explore early memories. You can ask the client to recall 3 to 6 early memories from childhood. Can you share your earliest memory, something you see in your mind clearly? It could be something simple like your first day of school, birthday, holiday, getting in trouble, winning a game. Anything you see clearly in your mind. And then some follow-up questions, how old were you? Who else was there? What was the most vivid part? How did you feel in that moment? So that can just kind of help you explore. And then the goal is to help the therapist understand the client's inner beliefs and that may be faulty or outdated. So that's that private logic again. Um, Client's private logic or mistaken beliefs. It can help identify some of the issues with the life tasks, like, work, and relationships. And it can also identify compensations or perceived inferiority. So here's a couple of examples of like early recollections and how they could be related to the complexes. Remember, there's inferiority and superiority complexes. So which complex could these early recollections be related to? So imagine you're talking to a client and he says, I remember about being 5 years old, standing on the edge of a playground, watching the other kids play. I wanted to join in, but I was too slow and always got caught first. So they stopped asking me to play. I remember feeling small and wishing I could run faster like the other kids. So if you had to guess if this was inferiority or superiority complex, which one would you say? And then I remember being in kindergarten and finishing coloring assignment before everyone. I held up my picture and told the teacher it was the best one. I remember thinking no one else colors as good as me. I liked when the teacher said I was smart, and I looked around to see if the other kids heard it. So would you say this is inferiority or is it superiority? And then early recollections related to birth order. I remember when my younger sister was born, I was about 4. Everyone came to see the baby, and I had to stay quiet and out of the way. I brought my mom a drawing I made, but she was too tired to look at it. I remember feeling like no one noticed me anymore. So if you had to guess if this was like oldest, second oldest, middle child, sounds like it might be the oldest child, worrying that they might be replaced. Um, I always had to wait my turn. My older brother got to do things first, and my little sister got help all the time. I don't think anyone ever really paid attention to me, so that could kind of show like a middle child early recollection. I used to make everyone laugh at the dinner table, even when I spilled something. They said I was cute and I liked being the fun one, so that could be the baby of the family. And then I liked playing by myself and making up stories. Adults always said I was mature for my age. That could be an indication of an only child as well. Another technique that was part of Adler is acting as if. So, acting as if is a therapeutic technique in which clients are encouraged to behave as though they are already the person they want to become, or to act as if they have already achieved the desired goal. So, in some ways, it's almost like a vision technique, or something like that. I remember having a friend that had taken their dog to animal training, and their dog was not behaving particularly well. And one of the techniques that the animal trainer said to do was imagine that they were like someone that they thought of in their life that was like the most like in charge type, because that's what their dog needed. They need somebody to kind of just be more dominant. And so I said, think of a dominant person, think of somebody who is in charge, and see if you can embody that when you're giving commands to your dog. And they actually did that, and it actually worked. So now, while that's not exactly acting as if, it's one of those techniques that's out there that can help. Some people. So it allows the clients to test out new behaviors, overcoming feelings of inadequacy. It can also help them to gain confidence as well. So that there's that acting as if technique that you'll see visited again. You'll also see some of the ideas of like private logic and basic mistake explored, especially when we get to the cognitive behavioral therapies. Um, Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck expand on that idea of private logic and basic mistake. So wrapping up, Adler's influences. We know that Viktor Frankl studied with both Freud and Adler. Rollo May studied with Adler. Irving Yalom did as well. Um, we know that parts of Adler's theory you can see in Carl Rogers' Person-Centered. You can also see it in Martin Seligman, who is the founder of positive psychology, which happened in the late 90s, early 2000s. You see it, as I mentioned, in the cognitive therapies with Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck, and also inspiring family therapy as well, because Adler was one of the instead of working with just the individual, he was working in the child guidance center, so he was working with family. So as we go forward, see if you can recognize some of the Adlerian concepts uh, in the weeks ahead. So some things for discussion. What are the differences between Freud and Adler, and which perspective do you prefer more? So in class, usually the students tend to align more with Adler because there tends to be more of an empowerment, more of an working with strengths, which is kind of where a lot of where we've have moved towards. But some people can still appreciate some of the Freudian techniques as well, in terms of understanding the unconscious, or understanding how childhood can affect us, understanding defense mechanisms, understanding internal conflict. But more students tend to go in the direction of Adler. When you're going to look at your guidelines for papers, you're going to have the option of writing about Freud and the psychoanalytic approach, or Adler in the individual psychology approach. And you'll be revisiting the video quizzes when you go to write your paper. As well, to look at the techniques and explore the techniques a little bit more. So that is ending the section on psychoanalytic. So we've talked about Freud, we talked about Adler, we talked a little bit about Carl Jung. Um, and as we move forward next week, we'll be moving into the humanistic. So the two humanistic theories, approaches that we'll be dealing with are um, existential approaches and person-centered. Gestalt is also part of that, but because this is a condensed 7-week course, we're not going to cover Gestalts in here, but we will cover existentialism and person-centered. All right, take care. Bye.